Good afternoon and good evening for those of you watching in Europe. Welcome back to the Washington Outsider. For those who don't know me, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, Dr. Tom Palmer from Atlas Network and Robert Witek-Pogorzelski. He's a Polish law firm partner. Both of them are involved in humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian refugees, helping transport them and provide accommodations in Poland. The situation has been intense over the last few weeks. Basically, I'll start by giving each of them some time to describe their backgrounds and their experiences, and then I'll follow with questions and answers for the audience. Uh, which of you gentlemen would like to go first?
Sure. Well, I guess my experiences in this issue are probably representative to many Polish citizens. It started with the willingness to help some friends from Ukraine. We've had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian citizens living in Poland. I have friends from law schools, from New York, who are Ukrainian. I've been there several times. So the moment the war started, the first instinct was to contact the people and make sure they're safe. Assure them that if they need to leave the country, we will provide them with accommodation and then make sure that their basic needs are secured. And throughout first week, my partners and some friends decided to also get involved, and they started raising money, spending their own money, and getting involved in several groups on social media with the goal to help refugees the way we can. And I have to say it was quite a uplifting period because it's like for every dollar that we spent out of our pocket, we would get like $100 from people we know, clients, friends, acquaintances, strangers. Basically, we were able to rent for a fraction of market price a house, quite a big house, for 6 months. Then we started gathering food, clothes, cosmetics, basically products. Turned out to be tremendous amount of gifts that people would just keep bringing in. And after, I guess, and that was something that was going on throughout the entire country. I mean, wherever you would look, there were people offering help, roof, food, businesses providing special discounts for help. It was a 100% grassroots movement. I mean, I think that by the time the government actually got involved, everything was already perfectly working just fine, and I inclined to suspect that for the first 3 weeks of the war, the government hasn't spent a single dollar for housing or any material help for refugees. It wasn't necessary. On the other hand, I have to say that all the obstacles, administrative and whatever issues those volunteers might face, they were removed. For example, cities all around the country were organizing reception points, and there was a problem with stamps on passports because of the amount of people that were coming in every day, and the line on some border crosses would take like 2 days for people who had to stay and stand. They were exhausted, so the border officers would just let them go through without putting a stamp in their passport, which resulted in a problem because the procedures for applications for legal residence and employment require filing documents in a certain period of time after crossing the border. And the moment you
Looks like we might have lost him there for the moment.
Yeah, just to let you know, I'm just letting everyone have a statement, and then I'll proceed with the actual interview questions just to provide a background. So you have whatever time you need to also explain as a background. I think it works better when there are two panelists.
Well, so if I should address this question, I think Robert's video is frozen for the moment.
Yes.
I got involved in this going back to the Soviet Union, was active in helping people to challenge communist tyranny, bringing in books, photocopiers, fax machines, laptop computers for publishing alternatives to communism, if you will. And I maintained that connection over years and with groups both in Russia and Ukraine and elsewhere. Atlas Network works mainly with think tanks, so research institutes that propose policy improvements.
Sure.
And so consequently, I had been in the Middle East and then in Turkey and was going to Israel to meet with partners there, and got COVID in Turkey. And so I went into isolation. And then the war started when I was there, and I began connecting with people.
Hi. Sorry.
And then immediately contacting Ukrainian partners. I did a quick Zoom like this for a lot of people who were concerned, began to raise money. And as soon as I could get out of the COVID quarantine, I hopped on the flight to Poland, met with Polish partners, and they're very active, both helping people in Poland, which is what Robert's talking about. This is really warms the heart to see how Polish people have stepped up for this. My partners have been mainly working with humanitarian issues inside Ukraine. So we should not forget that many people have not been able to get out. And so they need to have supplies delivered to them. And not only the things that immediately come to mind, like bandages for wounds, insulin for diabetic patients, baby formula for tiny infants, sometimes cancer treatments, chemotherapy that's not available, but has to be delivered to people or they will perish, as well as a non-lethal humanitarian aid, such as bulletproof vests. Kremlin snipers are killing medics, ambulance drivers, emergency workers. And so we are working to deliver body armor to them, vehicles. We're hoping for armored vehicles also to protect them, because we've seen a number of these humanitarian aid vehicles are shot up by Russian army forces. So we have a chain of groups throughout Europe bringing supplies into Poland and Romania both, and then getting it across the border. The people who at great personal risk take it into Kharkiv, into the outskirts of Kyiv, into Chernovitzy, Kherson, and other places. We've tried also Mariupol, but this is now surrounded and under vicious bombardment. But so many wonderful groups are dealing with the refugees who managed to leave. God bless them. And it's an astonishing effort. I'm just really so happy to see Polish people, but also Spaniards and Italians and Danes and Germans and other people here to help. And my effort has been mainly getting humanitarian aid into Ukraine, to the particular places where it's needed.
So what I'm seeing is that there's a huge international effort that actually doesn't get nearly as much coverage as it should in providing this humanitarian assistance. We are hearing about the flow of refugees and about the needs and the situation. We're not really hearing a lot of what is being done to help them, and outside state actors pledging various items, and about individuals who are involved in this. Back to Robert, because he didn't get to finish, and then I'll come back to both of you with questions.
Yeah. Sorry about that. What I was getting at is, well, just to finish the timeline of what was going on. So for the first 3 weeks of the war, we had actually a situation where refugees, there were so many people offering help that refugees were able to pick which city they want to go in and actually choose the specific house they wanted to live in, etc. That ended about 2 weeks ago, and I could see on groups on social media that basically, Warsaw, the big metropolitan areas are pretty much full, and then so the focus shift on smaller cities and rural areas, but it was kind of a problem because Ukrainians don't really, well, most of the people that were coming in, they don't know other cities in Poland, other areas than Warsaw, Gdańsk, Krakow, maybe Wrocław. So many people were hesitant or afraid to go to some smaller towns. So there were big efforts by coordinators. There's a group of people who actually devoted full most of the time just to coordinate people, connecting refugees with people offering help. So they had to convince and explain to them that a city where there's 50,000 citizens doesn't have to be a bad place to live, and that is still going on right now. And that's something that just came to my mind when you were saying that there is not enough coverage. I'm pretty sure that it's a paradox of what happened, because you don't see, well, you have over 2 million refugees and not a single refugee camp. There is it doesn't look dramatic when you come to go around Polish cities. Nothing is really changed. You don't see those millions of immigrants, packed in some shelters or whatever, because there's no need for that, and that, I guess, results in being less attractive from a media perspective. Drama sells, but as much as it's great what happened so far, and it's not it didn't generate a serious crisis in Poland from that perspective. We're thinking long term, and there's a lot to be done in order to keep it this way, because it might turn into a crisis. Now we're at the stage where my friends took in a total of 42 people, gave them housing, and they have all their needs secured. So far, I think we're only to get a job to few of them. You have constant ads online, which I can't stress enough the positive role of social media and internet in general in terms of connecting the needs and the supply. So you have constant ads of people offering, I don't know, pastries or cooking, cleaning, you know, any assistance that would allow them to make money and to just try to have their situation stabilized. On the other hand, there is something that is noticeable lately, that many of those Ukrainians don't really comprehend, or maybe have a kind of naive hope that this is very temporary and there is no really need to try to settle in and find a job and whatever, because they'll be going back very soon, which is something I really pray will happen, but not something we can count on realistically. So there's a big need for psychological and psychiatric help by specialists who can communicate in Ukrainian language. We actually do have, and the government pretty swiftly started the program for online language lessons for Ukrainians, which is very good and will probably help a lot of people to find a job and go by for a longer period. But you know, the people that are helping are often not wealthy people. They cannot afford to, you know, have a family or two under the roof, feed them, and make sure that everything is provided. Last week, our government introduced a program of payments for people who took in Ukrainians, which are about, I don't know, $8.50 a day per person, which is enough to feed a person with home cooked meals. Nothing expensive, but to be honest, I have not met a single person who actually received any money yet, and I think nobody really knows how it's going to be distributed and how it's going to work. So it is. There is a lot of improvisation, even with the legislation. You know, there was a bill introduced dedicated specially to helping refugees, and like after a few days of working on it, the bill was finally became the law, and somebody noticed that that bill actually applies only to immigrants who cross the border directly from Ukraine. There's plenty of people who cross through Romania or went some other way around. So it had to be amended. Again, another week passed on. Within a week, it was corrected. But like I said, it's a fluid situation, a lot of improvisation. But so far, from the grassroots, the situation is contained in a way that it's not resulting in a crisis.
That's very helpful information to know, because again, from the coverage, we're not getting any of this, and I think the role of the governments in managing this crisis successful, I must add, has to be highlighted as well, because this is a tremendous effort on everyone's part. I'll be back to that momentarily, but I wanted to come back to Dr. Palmer and discuss the interesting point he made about this introduction of humanitarian aid into the country. First of all, how does this process work? Let's say somebody wants to volunteer in that capacity. Who do they connect with? What's the step from, you know, leaving the United States or a European country and arriving to being able to kind of manage this situation? Who are the coordinators, and how do you make sure that they're not fraudulent efforts?
So those are the last one in particular is extremely important, there are terrible people putting out scams, and people should just be alert to this. But you can check on these things, check the links and so on. And there are reputable groups that are doing work mainly with refugees outside. So Caritas, Red Cross, and so on. These are well known. So still be cautious, make sure it's the correct website. One thing that I'm encouraging people to avoid, don't send used clothes and things like that. The volunteers have to go through it and throw away more than half of it. It's really a burden on them, not helping. So good-hearted people, they want to help, but in a way they're cleaning out their closets, and it's a burden.
It's something we had to deal with as well.
Yeah, so we should think very carefully. And just to be very frank, money sent to the right people that you check, then let them decide where it should go. It's better than sending food or other things like that, unless you have really special knowledge. For instance, a doctor friend of mine came from the United States. He brought $50,000 worth of very specialized medical equipment, including ultrasound devices that work off of your iPhone to determine if there's internal bleeding, which they didn't have. So these are he had the knowledge. Most of us don't have that knowledge. And so money really matters more. Let the people who know spend it. In terms of how it's working, it's sometimes frustrating to me and others that there is no centralization, like who's in charge. But the fact is, it's thousands of people organizing in overlapping circles. This person knows that person, who knows this person, who knows that person. Now you have a connection that will deliver insulin or will deliver the right products to the right people. So if you're abroad, you don't know that network, just to be frank. It's almost impossible. I would recommend people abroad to look for charities that are reputable, not something they just saw on Facebook, but something that they know. Investigate it, and then specify that they want the money for Ukrainian aid. We've had a couple of cases where people say, I want to come, but it's not clear what they can do. If you don't speak Russian, Ukrainian, or Polish, you're going to be more of a burden on local people who have to take care of all of your needs. Sending them money really, honestly, does more good, in my opinion. And let me add one thing, just to supplement something that Robert said about language. The people I have been bringing out, I go in with vans of material. We take caravans in full of useful things. And then we don't go back empty. We bring people, even from the train station. Go to the train station, bring them back. All the people I brought back actually don't speak Ukrainian well. They speak Russian. And this goes to one of the lies of the Kremlin. They say to the world, oh, it's a conflict between Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers. It's not true. The people who are being killed in large numbers speak Russian at home, but they want to be Ukrainian. They want to be Ukrainian citizens in a free society, not under of Putin. So there's also a lot of Russian speakers coming here, and I had even at the stores, my very limited, tiny bit of Russian to intercede between Russian speakers and Polish speakers to help them to get what they needed. So there's a lot of Russian speakers, and they should not be confused with supporters of Putin. They are victims. And they say very clearly, we want to live in a free Ukraine that is independent. We can speak Russian, neighbors speak Ukrainian, and we have the freedom to do that. So to wrap up your question, if you're in Canada, Britain, the United States, someplace, France, find the reputable charity that you trust, and then be willing to donate to that for Ukrainian efforts. And be careful about scams.
Another issue, by the way, that the media has not covered well, despite its value, is the fact that after the Crimea annexation, a number of Russians, dissidents, politicians, others, they actually moved to Ukraine, some of them.
Yes.
And that has, the irony of all of this is that, Russia called for denazification, but yet a number of Russian citizens ended up going to Ukraine to escape political reprisals for their opposition to the 2014 event. And none of these people are now being interviewed. We don't hear from them in the media. The narrative has become very, very focused on the immediate events and not really seen as a continuation of those past events, really. An unfinished business on Putin's part, so to speak, and that includes the very people he continued persecuting that entire time and who are now sharing the same needs as anyone else in Ukraine due to the attacks and the bombardment. So that's kind of escaped general attention. Coming back to Robert, you've noted this amazing ability to coordinate private networks for providing assistance until the government finally stepped in. What is the situation right now in terms of coordination between the government and volunteers on the private side, and how is it managed, and does it function well?
Well, I think most of the coordination efforts are done locally by local authorities. I haven't been to the border, so I think that right at the border, those efforts are probably coordinated by the border patrol officers and some government officials, but usually the actually making connections between people who would accommodate refugees and the refugees themselves are done locally. So they get to a certain point. There's organized either on the train station or at some the city building in the city where people are appointed by local authorities, and those volunteers who were doing it from the start are actually working together to make sure that those people who come in don't spend any more time than is absolutely necessary in those reception points, and are transported as soon as possible to a safe place where they can have a comfortable bed and something to eat and a shower to use. So from my perspective, the main effort is done by local authorities rather than the government. Probably the government is focusing on working with Ukrainian government and ensuring shipments to Ukraine rather than and removing all the obstacles from the volunteers and local authorities that they can they are doing pretty well for the last month, and honestly I think that it's better this way rather than government officials saying that we're reorganizing the whole process and now we're taking over. It wouldn't be a good thing, and it would just disrupt the process. So far it's working fine.
Well,
I guess I guess with time probably the government will have to be more active in terms of relocating some of those people to other countries in Europe, because that's something I believe that has to be coordinated on a government level. But I think it's going to take some time before that is actually a fully working process. Because right now, I had last Friday, exactly a week ago, I had a person from London who contacted me offering a place to stay, a job, and pretty much everything that needed for a family in London. And our coordinators asked the people that we're helping if anyone would be willing to go there, and nobody wanted to go. First of all, because of the language, and second of all, because they want to be close to Ukraine, hoping that they will be going back pretty soon. So, making this decision to just go somewhere far away and settle in and try to have their lives there. They're not yet ready for that yet.
The United States just decided to take in up to 100,000 refugees from Ukraine, but again, it's going to be unclear what that process is actually like, given the fact that this situation is highly fluid. Poland alone has over 1 million refugees, from my understanding by now. And
a lot more than 1 million.
A lot
Poland?
more.
No, 2.2 million. 2.2 million.
It's over 5% of the Polish population, to give a sense of the magnitude. But there's an element that comes out, and I think Robert probably agrees with me on this. You can't move refugees like they were containers of soup. They're people.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to go here or there. And it's really important for the governments to recognize these are human beings who have their own ideas. They're not cartons you can move. And that means let them work on their network. So people I brought out, so I've been 5 times in and out of Ukraine, got back last night. And one, they have a daughter in Spain. So they were on a bus to Spain. Another woman, it's her daughter that contacted me. She lives in Paris. So mom and the cat are going to Paris. There's a lot more of that than people think. Now, that's not true of everyone, of course, if they don't have connections or family, but a lot of people do. So I don't think we should get into the mode of thinking governments have to move people around. Let them decide where they want to go, and respect their moral agency and their ability to make plans for their own lives.
I have to say that's a very interesting observation, and there is a radical contrast between this current crisis and the Syrian crisis. First of all, primarily because a lot of the Syrians, there was a major cultural clash, and people were also traveling by foot all over Europe through third countries, and it was a completely different structure situation. Here, I see there's a lot of networking, organizing, and already connections that exist that facilitate the process.
There are several similarities, though, that need to be kept in mind. Again, Robert put his finger on exactly the big issue. You do not want refugee camps. This is a catastrophe. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years of refugee camps, it's a disaster. And the Polish government did something wise. They let them work. And all the European governments should do that. Germany did that much better for Syrians also. When you can come in, get a job, support yourself, you have dignity, you contribute to the community, you're not seen as a burden. It's a much healthier case than becoming a dependent in a refugee camp for 5, 10, whatever years. So the European governments and the American government have to wake up and say, these are people, they have dignity, let them work. Now that means a few things that need to be done, like mainly it's moms coming out, so it's women and children. One has to take care of the children while mom is working. They need to open up and allow there to be daycare so that mom can go to work and the kids are in daycare in either Ukrainian or Russian or maybe learning Polish or French or something. But they need to open the markets to allow those things to happen so people can sort themselves out. The big strength of this effort is not the centralization, which has some advantages, but the decentralization. That really has been an eye-opener for me, to see all these people connecting in small circles and doing great things as a consequence.
You're absolutely right, if I may, but it's kind of easy to do that in Poland for one reason that Irina said that the cultural similarities, for one thing, we have, Poland and Ukraine has a very long history of interactions with some bad moments as well, but we've shared a huge part of our history. And another thing is that we had, like I said, probably hundreds of thousands of people already living here, working here, making friends, having some already settled in. Many of them went back to fight now in the war, but because of that, this integration and the fact that people would easily open their doors to those refugees and just take them in under their own roof was much easier, surely, than it would be for any French person. Or certainly it wasn't the case with the Syrian crisis. Also, the demographic also mattered. I mean, pretty much only women and children come from Ukraine, which was not necessarily the case with Syrians. So, in a sense, you may say that it was easy for Polish people to deal with it the way it should be dealt with, in a perfect scenario, to avoid those terrible refugee camps that do not solve a problem and actually generate more in a long-term perspective.
Now, one question that's been on my mind is that even though all of this is being managed much better for all sorts of reasons, nevertheless, it's still a big economic burden. It's still a situation that needs to be resolved, and it probably won't be resolved very quickly, even if the war were to end tomorrow and Russia were to withdraw all of its forces completely. The infrastructural destruction has been tremendous. The chaos resulting from it, the medical needs, all of that has been a huge problem. And now you have all these countries trying to provide assistance while simultaneously dealing with the refugees. So the question is, what kind of assistance do these countries in the immediate vicinity of Ukraine need for themselves? We know that NATO is sending in forces to the borders and so forth, but in terms of humanitarian, easing economic burdens, what, in your opinion, should be done, needs to be done, if anything?
There you go first, Robert.
I don't think anything can be done to actually save the situation other than making sure that war is finished. I mean, I don't know if you look at the statistics, how much food, especially grains, come out of Ukraine, not only to Europe but throughout all the United Nations food programs around the world. You will see that we are just getting into the crisis in terms of that. Steel is something that is already a big problem, and I just spoke to one of the directors of a quite big real estate company in Poland, who told me straight away that they are thinking about freezing lots of their projects because they're expecting steel either to be unavailable at all or the prices to hike to a ridiculous levels, making the project economically ineffective. So I don't think, of course, the issue for the rest of Poland has been diversifying gas and oil sources for a while now, so we're probably fine with that, but the rest of the Europe not necessarily. So I really don't know, is there anything that can be brought from the United States that would make sure that the crisis doesn't come in the next months.
Well, US is also one of the big producers of wheat, and I'm seeing just today there was a deal signed between EU and US on gas, but the problem is with that.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the deal itself is very vaguely worded. US has cut short its gas production, so I'm not entirely sure how that deal is going to actually be fulfilled, given US has deliberately shut down its pipelines, and there's no mechanism that has been yet established to fulfill the terms. So that alone is an issue, but even I'm not hearing deals being negotiated in terms of wheat production, steel, or any other major things. There's a lot more room to cooperation, but it's also not going to be cheap. US products are more expensive.
And I don't think you can actually fulfill that gap. I can't give you out at the top of my head the numbers, but I did look at them a few weeks ago. And if you look at the percentage of wheat that is supplied by Ukraine, I don't believe any number of ships from US could be sent to Europe that would actually fill that gap.
Let me add something to that. There's a certain sense in which governments couldn't solve this problem. This is what you need markets for. The price of steel is going up. I have seen it. My colleagues are making body armor for medics, and the price of steel went up. Right? This is just a fact. It's the market telling us these things are more scarce. The worst thing to do would be to control those prices. That will generate shortage and corruption and chaos. So let the price reach the market price and send the signal, make more steel, economize on the use of steel, and so on. I'm in touch with members of the Ukrainian parliament, and I'll give you a small microcosm of what Ukraine can do for themselves to get out of the crisis. When I go across the border, the paperwork is sometimes ferocious. 3.5 hours sitting at the border, dealing with paperwork for bringing in humanitarian supplies, okay? And to talk like a Californian, I want to say, really, this is the time to fill out some forms? Unbelievable. Well, I talked to members of parliament and they said, this will stop. We are going to cut this. Border officials who are bureaucrats, who think like normal bureaucrats, you have to fill out the forms, going back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they have to realize that is the past. That's the past. Get rid of that. Check to make sure there's not something, bombs or guns or something like that. But when it's medical supplies, sleeping bags, and things, let it go. And don't hassle people needlessly. Ukraine, if you go from Poland to Ukraine, you see Poland is much richer than Ukraine. Why? Because for 23 years, there was no economic reform. It maintained a post-Soviet economic system. The buildings are crumbling and dirty. The roads are full of holes. They lost 2 decades of opportunity. But now, as things are becoming clear, Ukraine has the opportunity to get the reforms right and to become a wealthy country, like Germany did after the war. Germany was destroyed. The cities were like Mariupol today, all of them, the big cities. And after Ludwig Erhard opened the economy, they created the economic miracle. Same thing in Italy after the war, when they got rid of the fascist legislation. So Ukraine has an opportunity to solve its own problem if they get rid of the heritage of Soviet economics. There are 3,620, I believe, state-owned companies still in Ukraine. That's crazy. It's just crazy. Turn them over to the private sector, close them down if they are losing money, and then Ukraine could become, in 5 years or 10 years, a rapidly growing economy, and will not need foreign aid and assistance. So we should distinguish emergency aid and I think that's warranted and correct. Long-term aid is historically correlated with poverty. Don't do it. Let the Ukrainians create a dynamic economy like they have done in Poland. Poland is amazing. They got it right after communism, and Ukraine did not. And that's one of the reasons they're suffering today.
Well, that is a valid point you just said, and I think that whatever sentiment that was left in Ukraine for the Soviet times in the last 20 years, it's gone now. It's absolutely gone. And yeah, I guess you might say that it's kind of shock therapy once it's over and they do rebuild. They might actually rebuild on a way better fundamentals and economically become a much faster growing country without that the shadow of the Soviet mentality and some schemes that they were still there. I know they were still there. You could tell by the way they were doing. Lots of my friends do business with Ukrainians, so it was never as bad as in Russia.
Yes.
But it was somewhere halfway between one and the other, and they never actually cut off that method of operating, if you may. So yeah, I guess that something good might come out of it, although it seems cold-hearted to say that when we're talking about war and people dying, but from an economical perspective.
Not to sound too cynical, but I actually hope to see more of Polish advisors on economic reform than some of the current American ones, given the state of the boondoggles in the United States and inflation resulting from those boondoggles with absolutely nothing to show for it, and it's just talking about our infrastructure bill that has not improved anything as far as I see, and I haven't heard anyone across the country actually mentioning anything positive resulting from that monstrosity. I wanted to, speaking of challenges, by the way, earlier, Dr. Palmer, you mentioned the challenges of transporting bulletproof vests and other necessities to war-torn cities, Mariupol being under siege and becoming impossible. Can you describe a little bit about the process, just to get the audience the idea of what an undertaking that is and how that process actually works?
I don't play every role in that. They're chained, as Robert knows too. This person works with that person, with this person, and so on. But there are people that I work with in Europe who get the supplies in Germany and Denmark and Spain and so on, get it here to Poland or to Romania. Then we have teams of people who deliver it across the border. They meet up with other people who then take it further in. And these are all connected on Telegram and Signal and so on. And they're networks of friends who trust each other. I mean, that's really how this works. And then it gets into the hospital or the place here or there. Some places like Mariupol is just not reachable now. It's a horror what's happening. I brought back a Polish medic who had taken an ambulance as a gift because all the ambulances in Mariupol have been stolen by Russian troops. This is an army that is looting and kidnapping. It's a long tradition in this regard. They kidnap the ambulance workers, doctors, medics, and take them to Russia. I mean, this is unbelievable. It's like medieval warfare or before, but there are no ambulances now. He brought one to go to Mariupol, and then he needed a ride because he drove the ambulance to Ukraine. He needed a ride back. But those are the kinds of things that are happening to get these things to where they need to be. And it wouldn't work to have one central committee allocating everything. They can't know the need in this town or that place or that hospital. So it's a really kind of spontaneous order mechanism, not centrally directed. Think of you have big blood vessels and then little capillaries that send out the nutrients to this town, this village, and that place. It's not perfect, nothing is, but it is bringing help to the places where people live and need it. And that, to me, makes all of it worth it and more. So last night, I spent the night in freezing weather, sleeping in the chair, the driving seat of my car in Ukraine, because there's no place to stay or sleep. Everything closes, curfew, and so on. But then I got to deliver in the morning 2 vans full of needed goods. And we handed them off to our friends there. They took them and then they went to where they need to be.
I have exactly the same experience on a micro scale. I have a close friend who actually went to Forum with me and Irina at the same time. He's in Kiev, and he's not a soldier, but he's a lawyer. So he was drafted, I say, to the Turkish defense, very poorly equipped. He was given a single magazine for his AK, which is impossible to do with if actual combat comes up. So we grabbed some the package with magazines, the gas masks, some equipment, etc. So I passed it to my friend who did business with Ukrainians for many years. He was importing frozen fruits from there, and he goes there once every 2 weeks with everything that's needed. Lots of some helmets, diapers, female products, whatever it comes back, bringing some people whoever wants to come. So he was given phone number to Alex's friend from Lvov, because they were going to Lvov. The friend that he used to drive their car together on race tracks. So that friend would pick up the package to Alex, pass it on to some other friend who would actually go to Kiev. That guy called him, and within 48 hours, the package was delivered to him by people that I've never met. I have absolutely no other reason to trust than Alex writing, call this guy, and he will pick it up and he'll deal with it after that. It works on trust, and I actually think that bad times bring out the best in people.
In many, in many cases, I've taken just a package, and it's medicine or something very special, and it's got a name and a phone number. And because I don't have Ukrainian language skills, I'll find someone and say, will you call this person for me? I'm sitting there on the street with this car full of stuff, and people come. And I say, what is your name? I'm so-and-so. I have this package. Give it to them. And it was a bit like being a postal service guy or UPS or Federal Express.
That's exactly how my package looked like. Yeah. Alex's name and the phone number of his friend.
So those sort of things are happening, and it is friends to friends, family to friends. And sometimes I get people say, can you take this? The one thing I do, if it's in my car, I want to see what's in it. So we open it, I make sure it's all legal. I don't have any problems there. But I'm a stranger to these people, and they trust me to take things sometimes of great value to deliver to the appropriate recipient. And it's lots of people doing that, relying on trust networks to to make these things happen.
I'd say that's quite surreal, and that's not actually great story that doesn't really quite make it, because you know, there's a lot more focus on the military aspect of it and so on. Speaking of which, I know that Ukraine has announced the need for increased numbers of javelins, Stingers, tanks. NATO so far has not responded to tank requests. I don't know if that will change, but my question is based on what Robert just said. Is there sufficient number of light arms being distributed to the regular population that's been drafted? Stingers, javelins all require specialized skills from my understanding, and most people don't use them. Most people rely on regular light arms. Is there a sufficient number coming in, and ammunition and so forth?
I think, because I just spoke to Alex about that 2 days ago. We had a video call, and he's to me, look, because my question was, do they see a difference in the last week or so after the time where the shipments started to arrive, and there's been like big deliveries of equipment to Ukraine? And he said, look, I'm sure, I have no doubt that the specialized equipment, the rocket launchers, whatever, gets to the soldiers that need it most at this time right now. But you have to realize that we have 300,000 people who came to our country to fight, and you need to clothe them, you need to get them some training, get weapons, ammunition, etc., etc. That's a logistical nightmare. If you want to do it in a matter of days, it's pretty much impossible. So I can't really say if it's an issue of amount of equipment that's being delivered to Ukraine, or like numbers of ammo guns, etc., or is it a problem with actually distributing it in a very short period of time amongst a lot of people? Because right, like his conclusion was that he has no doubt that right now Ukraine has more soldiers than Russia. But so you know, I don't think that any country would be able to actually equip and train that many people in such a short period of time, regardless of how much equipment was available. But I guess, you know, it might be one or the other. But one and the other is probably a problem to deal with.
So at the very least, there is a need for help distributing whatever is coming in and help training people, but I also probably needing more weapons to begin with.
If I can add, I don't think it's so much getting the help. I'm not an expert in military affairs by any means, and I don't get involved in that. But friends of mine in Ukraine who are in territorial defense say there are a lot more volunteers than there are weapons. They're not drafting people. There may be some odd cases. These are volunteers. What the shortage is not people, men, and some women, by the way, who are taking up arms. The shortage is the arms. And there have been cases, villagers defending themselves with remarkable success with hunting weapons. It's quite surprising in this way, but the shortage is the weapons and not the people. Then there's the training. Most people don't know how to act under the extreme pressure of being shot at and explosions and so on. It takes training to overcome our natural instinctual reactions to act properly. And that I don't think is likely to happen overnight, but it's Ukrainians who are busy training their fellow citizens how to react, so that the professional army is at the front, and then in depth there are citizen soldiers in the territorial defense. And I'll tell you, I knew that the Ukrainians were going to fight from long before this. But
Yeah, same thing.
the
To be honest with you,
professionalism of the Ukrainian forces is astonishing, much, much higher as far as we can tell than the Russian forces.
I think I'm not sure where this underestimation of the Ukrainian forces came from. I think it may be due to the lack of general expertise in Western, particularly American foreign policy circles, which have been since the fall of the Soviet Union focused on the Middle East and China, and not so much on Eastern Europe or Russia. But you know, there's also a lot of deliberate propaganda that Russia has very successfully built up its image of a great power that has a huge standing army. It has purchased a lot of
Yeah.
expensive equipment, but equipment is not a substitute for strategy, for training, or for lack of theft and corruption in in the military forces. So
Look, I don't think it's been an underestimation of Ukrainian army. I think there's been a huge overestimation of Russian army, and there and both in terms of training of soldiers, but also equipment. It's easy to organize a parade with shiny toys that look like 22nd century, science fiction type movie type of weapons. But when it turns out that these weapons are actually failing, they don't work properly. Plus, there's a very limited number, and most of this equipment used is old and obsolete, and doesn't really pose a threat. And you put it against a very determined army with pretty modern, especially now after the deliveries from all over the world, the anti-tank missiles, anti-air launchers, etc. It turns out that the Russian army really should never be considered second army in the world.
no.
At least for a long time, it hasn't.
And speaking of which, I think one of the main concerns for the international community outside EU, NATO, the United States, a lot of the other countries have been hedging their bets on Russia as an alternative to US, whose foreign policy in recent years has been vacillating at best, unpredictable, and often not well thought out, to put it mildly. So there's been this image of Putin as a predictable, stable ally with a growing influence, particularly in the Middle East, and also Russia being a cheap commodities market for essential raw materials for much of the world, not to mention also a source of wheat and so forth. I'm not sure whether that's going to change the perception entirely, but seeing Putin's completely disastrous mismanagement of this conflict and of his own military should raise questions on his reliability as a partner. If this is somebody who has been entirely self-serving, as a head of state, and who has not paid attention to the basic needs of his military, just how much can you rely on him as if you are a different country?
I think. Do you have any doubts that he can be relied on as a partner of as a head of state right now? I think that veil is already dropped, and nobody should have doubt. However, I don't really think that it's the weakness of his army is a matter of Putin's mismanagement. I think it's something that we talked earlier about, the mentality and operating in a manner typical for Soviet Union.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure that the level of corruption there has resulted in people at the top not even being aware of what's going on below them. You know, there was the story about some Chinese tires that Russian
Yes.
transporters. I can bet that the generals and then the people at the very top had no idea that that was the equipment that was used, and probably money was paid for the best possible tires that could be bought, but at some point going down, that money was shrinking, and ended up getting the cheapest possible available product. And I think it's a mechanism that works on the scale of the entire army. And well, you know, at the end of the day, lucky for us and for the Ukrainians, because this way they really can beat them.
Can I add an element to that very quickly, and that is, there's been an image built up. Putin is steely resolved. He knows what he wants. He doesn't make mistakes, and so on. This is not true. He screwed up massively in Ukraine when he picked Yanukovych and selected him to be the president. He picked the dumbest, greediest, most venal and vulgar man in Ukraine. He didn't speak any Ukrainian. His Russian sounds like he's a gangster when he talks. He's a criminal, like he had a real criminal past. And he wanted to be as rich as Putin, but in Ukraine, you can't do that. So he looted the country. That was a mistake. If he had not done that, if he had picked a less greedy, less stupid person, Ukraine would probably still be in the orbit in a way. He made blunder after blunder. So I think he's evil. I don't say that of many people. He's a sociopath and evil. And he hates the existence of free societies. That's a key point. It's not about geopolitics per se. That plays some role. The existence of Ukraine as a former Soviet republic that is a free democracy, imperfect, blah, 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 right? We know that. Its mere existence is a mortal threat to Putin. But he has screwed up over and over and over. And we should get rid of the idea that the West is just weak and the democracies can't confront the dictatorships. He has made one mistake after another. And this war, I hope, will be his last mistake.
You know, that what you just mentioned is an idea going back all the way to Stalin, who also believed that democracies are weak and so on and so forth. And of course, Neville Chamberlain did not inspire much confidence, but after Chamberlain came Churchill, and we saw how all of that ended. So there is a point that, yes, free societies are open to complacency, corruption, you know, human nature taking hold, and people just, you know, watching out for their own personal affairs before national interests. But at the same time, when there is a crisis, they have mechanisms in place to organize much better and much faster and respond to the shock than entirely corrupt, unfree societies where you don't have those mechanisms in place. So I am not, you know, human nature is what it is, but there's no substitute for having, you know, a system that works and that works better. It may not be perfect, but there is a difference. I don't see Russia where the position switched, being able to confront a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, with the same level of efficiency as Poland has. I just don't see that happening. I see it as a very low trust society as a result of that corruption and lack of exposure to foreign coordination outside just simple market trade, you know, direct transactional issues, whereas Poland and Ukraine had been more integrated into high trust societies, which I think is making a difference during a crisis, where you can rely on these networks because you have those relationships, you have trust that the other person will not screw you over the way you would probably screw over them if you had half an opportunity, just to put it very plainly. I think that's what ultimately is going to make a big difference. I think right now a lot of people are underestimating these factors. They are underestimating that somebody, that a country that has a lack of these supporting mechanisms, there's only so much where it can get by exploiting other countries' weaknesses. US has been absent from a lot of places for a long time. That doesn't mean that it will never come back, and it doesn't mean that the current mentality won't at some point shift. It has room to make mistakes and to come back from them. Russia's margin for those sort of mistakes is very small to non-existent. I think this war is a complete disaster for them as much as they are for Europe. Europe sooner or later will recover from the food shortage crisis, from whatever. They can have relationships with many different countries and find ways of compensating for what is lost. Russia will temporarily gain support of some countries for whatever reason, but given their alliances, given that they are largely aligned with other corrupt countries and other corrupt regimes suffering from the same problems, I don't think the future of those coalitions is very bright.
Sure.
Right.
Actually, just before we leave, I wanted to ask Dr. Palmer to tell us a little bit about Atlas Network and what that is, because I don't think we got the introduction and how, and whether or not you're involved in this as an organization or whether that's your personal effort.
Well, it's both organizationally and me personally. We have partners in Ukraine and we have partners in Afghanistan. And when that crisis happened, we worked very hard to get the key leaders out, the ones on the kill lists, and to help our friends in Afghanistan who continue to work for equal rights for women and other key issues in that society. And similarly, our partners in Ukraine are dear to us, to me, and to our friends. And we do not abandon our friends in that moment. And so we have raised now, as of about an hour and a half ago, got another major donation. I've been on the phones a lot with donors. We've raised about $1,700,000 going into these efforts. But what we're doing is targeting through our partners on the ground in Ukraine what is needed where. There's micro information that we can get immediately this thing. On the other side of the border, God bless them, people are bringing in the survival things for people to live and welcoming them and giving them SIM cards, all those things. We're targeting with our partners inside. So atlasnetwork.org is our website, and people who trust us to deliver the money, check us out first. I mentioned there are scammers out there, but we are dedicating 100% of the money we're raising goes to our Ukrainian partners for dealing with humanitarian issues inside Ukraine. And it is heartening. I'll mention one more thing. In my age, all these people I met when they were college students, hundreds of them, and now they're young professionals and doctors and lawyers and salespeople and so on. And they really stepped up and are developing this capillary system all through the country, all throughout Europe, and then into Ukraine. And I think it's a moment of a lifetime to see kids show themselves as adults, taking responsibility for their fellow citizens.
That's amazing. Kudos on the tremendous job you're doing. Full disclosure, Robert went to the same law school as I did, and so did Alex, who was mentioned previously, and I'm just extremely fortunate to know such amazing people doing this amazing work at this time. I wanted to also ask Robert, what can we do to help with your continuing efforts at this time? Are there places where donations can be made? Where is there information about people volunteering their skills or assistance or help with finding online jobs for anybody or anything of that sort?
Well, for sure, right now I would seriously recommend to go through reputable organization like Red Cross, Caritas. They do great work. Like even for myself right now, my focus shifted on sending some equipment to Alex and to Kyiv rather than helping people here, because right now the main concern is to find jobs for people who are willing to work and have some skill set. So we're starting to build some database to try to have a list of people with their skill set, and what can we who can we connect them with in order to help them get a job. I don't really think it's time to actively look for places abroad to send those people to, because, like I said, they're not really ready, and surely we're not going to treat them like boxes and packages to send from one place or another, because that is not the point. So yeah, I think that right now the big organization, the Ukrainian government has some websites where you can actually donate money for the army, and I think that's the most helpful thing right now, because right now the refugee crisis is kind of contained, and the international community should focus on doing everything they can to just make sure that war ends as soon as possible, because that will resolve all the other problems.
Thank you so much to both of you for your time and for your continuing efforts, and for doing what you're doing, and also for this information vital to audiences who I know there's a lot of information out there, but having this personal insights, I think, is a great compliment to public information and everything that's coming out in the media. I wish both of you the best of success. Please stay safe, and please, in best of luck with your work. I hope to stay in touch, and if there's anything I can do to assist, I'll be happy to do so.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for spreading the word, because it's important to have as many people in the United States informed as possible.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this was the Washington Outsider. Please stay tuned for future programming. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.